So I wanted to lovingly correct this young sister. I'm sure she loves Christ. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But the law is not done away with. My first question to every Protestant is if Yeshua calling everything clean to consume and eat, meaning you can have your ham or shrimp, is so evident, then why did Peter question Elohim or God when he told him in Acts chapter 10 to slay and eat? Because he was there when Yeshua was refuting the Pharisees on their hand washing ritual. It sort of just strikes you as odd, doesn't it, that God would randomly do away with Leviticus chapter 11 and Peter would have absolutely no idea. But it's insane how much anachronism is going on, both from the rabbinic side as well as from the Protestant church side. So in the rabbinic side, they are performing eisegesis to put their traditions into the Word of God. They don't exist there, but they try to read them into what you have in the Tanakh or even in the Brit. And then with the Christian world, they try to read in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th century theology into the New Testament. And it doesn't even belong there because from a historical standpoint, it wasn't created until after the fact. Now, the problem with Rabbinic Judaism is they want to address every little matter of a diaphora. A diaphora is basically when God doesn't say anything endorsing something or against it in the Bible. But it appears that for people to function in their lives, there were a group of highly academic individuals that thought that everything needed to be broken down to the minutia. And this isn't the reality. Now, there might be some people in the Protestant world who would say that a diaphora is something that could be applied to Halloween. The problem with that, however, is that it has a lot of connections to ancient traditions and practices that would be rebuked directly by the law. Now, what this reminds me of is the fact in rabbinic tradition, there exists this thought that the tribe of Zebulun was a worker tribe that supported the tribe of Issachar, because the tribe of Issachar would have been a scholarly tribe studying Torah 24/7 and then receiving financial support from its neighbor tribe that worked on, let's just say, merchant type activities. Now, while this isn't in the Bible, this is a biblical concept. This idea that you have people who are congregants going to a congregation, or people who are part of a grand assembly and they're working, and then you have somebody working in full-time ministry, or even a group of people working in full-time ministry to make sure that they're fed, and the congregants are working regular vocations and they're tithing to the church in order that the person that is feeding them with the biblical truths can be compensated fairly. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17, the Apostle Paul says, "The elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor." Now, honor in a society was measured by how much people respected you and also in terms of your financial status. So when Paul is talking about double honor here, he's talking about both. And then he says, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. So in this rabbinic tradition, the logic follows that if one of the tribes is preaching and teaching, they should be supported enough to be able to do it full time. And basically, double honor is you basically get paid 2 times the amount of the people that are around you. So if you were in an early Greek city, you would have looked up the average wage in that city and paid your elders and your bishops 2 times that amount. And that's not so they can go around and be materialistic and get fancy watches and private jets, because the reality is that the prosperity teachers don't lead their congregants to prosperity. They only lead themselves to prosperity. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. And then this is why the Apostle Paul says in verse 11 of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, "If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you?" This is to say that so much work is being foregone, and I'm talking like traditional customary work, that if we aren't being compensated for looking at the scriptures and searching them so that you have the truth, we may end up being destitute. Now, in the Messianic world, there's a lot of this jelly roll attitude. I only talk to God when I need a favor. It just doesn't work like that, brothers. That doesn't even work. And it's funny because not only is that an attitude that's prevalent, to add to that, people think that they don't need to tithe to the church, even though it's commanded in the law. They don't need to give money to the church because they just throw their hands up and say, oh, well, God will take care of it. Not only that, but when it comes to needing to move things around or offer physical labor to put things up or set things down, they don't help. And then it's just a matter of when there's oneg, and by the way, oneg is the Hebrew word for pleasure, but when we say oneg, we're referring to feasting and fellowshipping and exegesis that happens after the sermon with the congregants. They just serve themselves and sit down. Now, when Paul told the assembly in Corinth to make their tithes or collections for the poor on the first day of the week in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 2, is it possible that he was hinting at the fact that making these collections on the Shabbat would not be appropriate? That the handling of money would not be appropriate at that time? I don't know. I don't want to read into the text. It's a possibility. But then at the same time, it may actually be helpful to do that on Shabbat if you're dealing with people who are absolutely destitute and really need it. The point, though, is to say that tithing was still very important in the early church, and that I respect Protestantism for maintaining that as a standard practice, even though they are teaching abrogation. But what we need to do is not teach abrogation and teach tithing to go along with that. I cannot emphasize this enough. I mean, when the Israelites arrived at Gilgal in the book of Joshua, which just means in Hebrew to roll away, their reproach and shame that came with being associated with Egypt and its pagan customs was rolled away. And we need to be the same way. Our past shame, our past guilt, our past associations need to be rolled away. And if we're not teaching the things that Mashiach Nagid, that is Messiah the Prince, or that Elohim has taught from the beginning, then we're not allowing that process to happen. So in addition to all this, there's this teacher that runs this page called Answering Islam Blog, and he uploaded a web page about Ignatius of Antioch condemning the practice of doing the law, doing the Sabbath, and said that God had changed the Sabbath to the Lord's Day. And this preacher says that Ignatius was alive during the time of the apostles. I mean, the first century apostles, like during the time of the book of Acts, during the events of the book of Acts. And that somehow grants him the authority to change the word of God. Okay, brother, have you ever thought about the possibility that there was heresy spreading in Antioch? That the idea of Docetism was going around? That Hellenistic philosophies were spreading? That this idea that you could change times and laws according to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 25 was going around? This anti-Mashiach Nagid spirit? I mean, who are we kidding? And he was talking to a man who clearly wasn't educated in the word, so he wasn't able to rebuttal him. Another thing that Ignatius mentioned was that people in general were abandoning the Sabbath and keeping the Lord's Day instead, which he called the, quote, queen and chief of all the days. What does the Torah say? It says, do not incline after the majority to do evil. Well, if you're going to break Shabbat just because the majority of people in your neighborhood, in your vicinity, in your city are doing it, then you are inclining after the majority to do evil. And for that reason, Ignatius of Antioch, if these writings are indeed his writings, and I'm sure they have been verified as such, then we need to disregard him completely. Forget about him. This is like a Muslim saying shrimp is halal. Who cares? Who cares what the imams say? Who cares what the Islamic authorities say? What does the word of Elohim say about shrimp? Don't eat it.